The Persian Gulf has always been a place where calm is an illusion, where the quietest days are simply pauses between storms, and where the ripple of a warship's rake can send shockwaves far beyond the horizon. When the world hears that Iran is on high alert and that a massive U.S. naval operation is shaking the Middle East, it's not because an isolated maneuver has occurred. It's because every step, every deployment, every signal carries with it decades of mistrust, history, and the ever-present specter of conflict. From the moment missiles first carved arcs into the sky over distant battlefields, nations learned that dominance at sea could mean survival on land. The waters of the Persian Gulf are not just a route for oil tankers, they are veins of global commerce, arteries of geopolitics, and a stage upon which power is declared and measured. When U.S. attack ships and large naval vessels begin their methodical advance into these strategic waters, the message is unmistakable. Readiness is no longer rhetorical, it is physical, observable, and immediate. For Iran, this buildup is not an abstract diplomatic development. It is a palpable reality that reverberates through its military commands, its political leadership, and the very psyche of a nation that has spent generations navigating the perilous waters between deterrence and provocation. The Islamic Republic's leadership does not see the presence of an armada as routine. It sees it as a test, a probe into vulnerabilities, a question posed not in words, but in steel, in sonar sweeps. Even if the U.S. insists that its operations are defensive or precautionary, perception is the currency of tension here, not reassurance. The first morning that Iran's Defense Command awoke to reports of multiple U.S. warships entering the Gulf at heightened alert, screens lit up with radar blips and satellite overlays. Officers in austere, windowless rooms whispered coordinates into secure lines, their voices betraying only a fraction of the concern pulsing beneath their calm exteriors. In Tehran, commanders frame this as strategic readiness, but the word readiness is always double-edged. It implies both preparation and expectation, and when expectation is uncertainty, anxiety follows swiftly. Across the water, U.S. naval crews were going about their own rehearsed routines, though few aboard knew how history might remember this deployment. Sailors on the bridge scanned the horizon through gray light, radar humming its endless vigilance. Engines hummed with disciplined precision, each ship in formation maintaining position like dancers trained for an unseen choreography. The magnitude of this naval task force was impossible to ignore. Guided missile destroyers bristling with weapons, an aircraft carrier looming like a floating citadel, reconnaissance aircraft streaking across open water to gather intelligence. On board the carrier, a vessel that could easily be mistaken for a small city if one didn't know the cost of every square meter, sailors and pilots lived with the knowledge that their deployment was not merely about deterrence, it was a signal to every government in the region, every ally, and every adversary. Their presence was a testament to capability, a demonstration of reach, and for some, an ominous portent of confrontation. The air smelled of fuel and anticipation, a mixture that cannot be measured but can certainly be felt. Families watching television back home saw images of aircraft launching into gray skies and warships cutting through sunlit seas, but numbers and rhetoric often blur together in the mind. What they did not see were the conversations behind closed doors in ministries and military headquarters across the Middle East, where analysts pored over data, debated worst-case scenarios, and drafted contingencies nobody hoped to enact. And then there were the markets, crude oil prices twitching like nervous hearts, insurance rates for tankers climbing as underwriters recalibrated risk, and global stock exchanges flickering at the first hint that geopolitical volatility was on the rise. The world economy does not live in distant capitals, it lives at the intersection of perception and reality, and when the Persian Gulf is shaken, the reverberations are felt from New York to Tokyo, from London to Mumbai. Inside Iran, the announcement of Navy exercise plans had already been met with stern warnings. The supreme leader publicly declared that any military strike would be treated as a full-scale war, a statement not made lightly by a government that understands the cost of conflict intimately. This rhetoric was crafted not for headlines alone. It was a psychological line drawn in sand that could turn to ash the moment real fire came into play. Yet beneath the public warnings and the naval deployments, something else was unfolding. Strategists on both sides knew that war in the Persian Gulf cannot be contained once it begins. There is no theater so narrow that explosions do not echo beyond shorelines, no waterway so small that missile fragments do not scatter into the wider world. An encounter between two ships could light the fuse, a misinterpreted radar lock could spiral into retaliation, a single flyby at the wrong altitude could trigger defensive protocols that are already set to fully armed. This is the paradox of escalation. Both sides claim restraint, yet every overt demonstration of power increases the probability of miscalculation. Confidence becomes overconfidence, alertness becomes hypervigilance, and in that state, mistakes happen, not out of malice, but out of misunderstanding, split-second decisions, and assumptions made under pressure. Iran's own military posture is not static either. Over the past year, Tehran has fortified strategic islands in the Gulf with advanced missile systems and increased patrols by fast attack craft capable of harassing larger vessels. Such moves were framed as defensive, a means of protecting sovereignty, but allies in the region and Western military analysts alike see these deployments as part of a broader strategy to complicate any potential intervention. A force designed to deny freedom of maneuver can easily become a force whose very existence escalates tension further. In the narrow corridors of international relations, every action begets a reaction. The U.S. issues warnings to Iran over planned drills in the Strait of Hormuz, and Tehran insists any foreign presence is itself a threat to national security. The U.S. emphasizes freedom of navigation, and Iran frames that as veiled aggression. Each government interprets the other's intentions through the worst possible lens, because in the calculus of deterrence, doubt is a weapon as sharp as any missile. Between the two powers, there is history, decades of clashes, sanctions, proxy confrontations, and unresolved grievances. There is a memory of war that never fully departed, and a fear that once the threshold of open conflict is crossed, it cannot easily be reversed. In such an atmosphere, the presence of a massive naval force does not merely exist, it pressurizes, it compresses time, it amplifies risks, and it turns every decision into a possibility of consequence far greater than its origin.
And so the ships remain in motion, cutting through water that carries the weight of oil and anxiety alike, while commanders in remote rooms compare coordinates and probabilities and prepare for what no one wants, and yet for which they must be ready. The longer the naval operation continues, the more the situation begins to change in ways that are subtle but profound. What starts as a show of force slowly becomes a test of endurance. Not just endurance of ships and crews, but of nerves, judgment, and political will. In the Persian Gulf, time itself becomes a pressure. Every additional day of heightened alert tightens the psychological grip on everyone involved. Inside Iran, high alert is not a symbolic phrase. It reshapes daily military life. Radar operators remain glued to their screens. Naval units rotate patrols at a pace that strains crews. Missile batteries remain active longer than normal, their operators aware that a single misread signal could trigger a chain of events impossible to stop once begun. In Tehran, policymakers weigh statements word by word, knowing that language alone can escalate or calm an already volatile situation. Across the water, American commanders face a similar burden. The presence of a massive naval force is meant to project certainty, but certainty is fragile when intentions are constantly questioned. Orders are precise, yet flexible. Rules of engagement are reviewed repeatedly. Every aircraft launch, every maneuver, every communications test is carried out with an awareness that it is being watched, recorded, and interpreted by an adversary searching for meaning. This mutual observation creates a dangerous feedback loop. Iran watches U.S. movements for signs of preparation. The U.S. watches Iran for indications of reaction. Each side believes it is responding defensively, yet each response feeds the other's suspicion. In this loop, escalation does not require aggression, it requires only momentum. The Persian Gulf's geography magnifies this danger. The waters are narrow, crowded, and unforgiving. Commercial tankers move alongside warships, fishing vessels cross invisible military boundaries. Civilian aircraft pass overhead as fighter jets patrol below. In such an environment, there is no margin for complacency. One misjudged distance, one delayed communication, one misunderstood maneuver can turn tension into crisis within minutes. What makes this moment particularly unstable is that it exists between clarity and conflict. No war has been declared, no attack has occurred, yet the conditions resemble those that have preceded confrontations in the past. Forces are forward deployed, political rhetoric is sharpened, domestic audiences are primed for strength rather than compromise. The stage is set, even if the actors insist they have no intention of performing the final act. Iran's leadership understands that allowing the situation to appear one-sided would undermine its deterrence. Strength in this context is not measured by immediate action, but by readiness and resolve. Exercises are announced, capabilities are displayed, statements emphasize sovereignty and red lines. Each signal is calibrated to show that Iran is neither surprised nor intimidated, even as it remains deeply alert. For the United States, the challenge is different but equally complex. Withdrawal or reduction could be interpreted as hesitation. Continued presence risks entrenchment. The longer the operation lasts, the more it must be justified to allies, to domestic audiences, and to adversaries. What began as a response to regional instability risks becoming a defining posture, one that narrows future options rather than expanding them. This is where diplomacy struggles to keep pace. Conversations may occur through intermediaries, quiet channels, and carefully worded messages, but they are always competing with the visibility of military power. A single image of a carrier deck filled with aircraft can outweigh pages of diplomatic language. In the modern media environment, visuals dominate perception, and perception often drives policy. The emotional weight of the situation extends far beyond decision-makers. In coastal cities around the Gulf, uncertainty becomes part of daily life. Shipping companies adjust routes, workers worry about disruptions, Families remember past conflicts that began with similar tension. The sense that events are moving beyond control is subtle but pervasive, a background hum of anxiety that grows louder with every headline. Globally, analysts debate whether this moment represents deterrence working as intended or deterrence drifting toward failure. Some argue that visible strength prevents miscalculation by leaving no doubt about consequences. Others warn that saturation of force increases the chance of accidental confrontation. Both arguments rely on assumptions about rational behavior, yet history repeatedly shows that rationality is fragile under pressure. As days pass, the most dangerous factor becomes normalization. When heightened alert becomes routine, vigilance dulls. When constant tension becomes familiar, warnings lose urgency. This is when mistakes slip through, unnoticed until it is too late to correct them. The longer forces operate in this state, the more likely that an unexpected variable will intrude. And yet, despite all this, conflict remains a choice, not an inevitability. Even now, restraint can prevail. A recalibration of posture, a shift in messaging, a quiet agreement to reduce proximity could begin to lower the temperature. Such steps would not erase mistrust, but they could prevent momentum from carrying both sides toward a collision neither truly wants. The question is whether leaders can act before momentum acts for them. The Persian Gulf has seen cycles of tension before. It has endured standoffs, near misses, and moments when the world seemed to hold its breath. Each time, the outcome depended less on power than on timing and judgment. This situation is no different, except that the tools are more advanced, the stakes more global, and the room for error smaller than ever. As U.S. ships continue to cut through strategic waters and Iran remains on high alert, the region exists in a suspended state, not at war, not at peace, but somewhere uncomfortably in between. This is the most unstable position of all. It is where decisions made quietly will matter far more than statements made loudly. For now, the waters remain navigable, the missiles remain unfired, the aircraft return to their decks, but the tension does not dissipate. It lingers, waiting for resolution or rupture. And the world watches, knowing that in the Persian Gulf, history has the habit of changing direction without warning.